Today I'm speaking with Carolyn Phillips, a renowned expert in Chinese gastronomy and author of acclaimed cookbooks such as All Under Heaven and the upcoming The Art of Chinese Baking. Carolyn's been celebrated for her knowledge and passion for Chinese cuisine. If you want to take a deep dive into Chinese food and cooking, this is the episode for you. This is Chris Spear, and you're listening to Chefs Without Restaurants, the show where I speak with culinary entrepreneurs and people working in the food and beverage industry outside of a traditional restaurant setting. I have 31 years of working in kitchens, but not restaurants, and I currently run a personal chef service, throwing dinner parties in the Washington, D.C. area. In today's conversation, Carolyn shares her journey into Chinese culinary culture. We'll dive into the rich diversity of Chinese regional cuisines, explore the art of dim sum, and discuss the often overlooked but fascinating world of Chinese desserts and baking. You'll hear Carolyn's insights on how learning the Chinese language enriched her understanding of its cuisine, and how regional ingredients and cooking techniques reflect China's vast cultural heritage. We also talk about how you can elevate your own Chinese cooking at home. She even gives some tips, if you're strolling the aisles of H Mart and want to know what's a good Chinese vinegar or soy sauce, she gives some tips for that, and I'll provide resources in the show notes as well. So whether you're a professional chef, a passionate home cook, or just someone who loves good food, this episode is packed with valuable information and inspiration. And if you're interested in the process of writing a cookbook, a couple episodes back, Carolyn spoke specifically about that. It was part of this conversation, but I wanted to release it for people who were specifically looking for advice on how to write a successful cookbook. So if that's you, go back 2 episodes and you'll find that part of our conversation. As always, you can find links to Carolyn's books and social media in the show notes. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Threads at Chefs Without Restaurants. And if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. As always, thanks so much for listening, and have a great week. Hey, Carolyn, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Before we start this, I'm not going to give your full bio, but I want to kind of set the stage here. So as I was doing some research for this, I saw that Epicurious wrote an article, and it was titled, "Is This the Best Chinese Cookbook Ever Written?" And that was written about one of your books. And Kevin Pang of America's Test Kitchen has said, "I can count on one hand the number of people I trust about Chinese gastronomy. Carolyn Phillips is one of them." And I think that's really important to kind of put out there because, a lot of people have cookbooks, a lot of people write about cuisines, but you have really done a lot of research here. You're clearly not an amateur. So I just wanted to set the stage a little before we started talking today. So that all being said, how did you get into Chinese cuisine?
I got into Chinese cuisine through the language. I studied at university and then went to Taiwan to actually learn it. You don't learn a language in college. And what charmed me about the culture initially, because I couldn't make heads or tails of it, was the food. And Taiwan was the center really of Chinese gastronomy for quite a while, because after mainland China kind of shut down during the Cultural Revolution, they had lots of great chefs in Taiwan, elsewhere around the world too, like Hong Kong and Japan and US, but mainly in Taiwan. And so I got to eat foods from all over China, which really is the size of Europe. Okay, it's an enormous. You can't think of it as a country. Think of it as a continent, right? Especially a culinary continent. And so I was able to eat foods from all over China without leaving a city, which was absolutely incredible.
Well, going back to the language, how hard is it? Because it seems so different than English or many of the other European languages. So that alone, like learning how to read, write, and speak, was that a huge undertaking for you?
Well, 1.3 billion people can't be wrong, right?
Sure. Yeah. Probably easier if you grow up surrounded by it, though.
Most definitely. Yeah. It's a terribly difficult language for a Westerner to learn because it's very different from our language. There's nothing in common. There's no alphabet. I mean, I learned Japanese as well, and you have basically a type of an alphabet going on. But in Chinese, there's nothing. It's just characters. And so you have to rewire your brain. And it's why so few Westerners are fluent in Chinese. And it takes a lot of insanity to go in there. and just kind of do a deep dive into the culture and become part of the culture for a long time before the brain kicks over and realizes this is a different way of thinking about things. And so I worked in Taiwan for 5 years at most of the cultural institutions there, like the History Museum and the Central Library, the Academia Sinica, as a translator and interpreter. And then when I came back to the States, I translated a couple books and then started working in the court system, the federal and state court system, California state court system, as an interpreter. So it was a great way to rewire the brain so that the language became part of my head.
I imagine. I think that's a huge accomplishment on its own.
Oh, thank you.
Looking at the food, a lot of people, go places, they fall in love with a cuisine. That doesn't mean they're going to write a 500-page book on the cuisine.
It's because my husband, who's a real foodie, he's Chinese, and he adores eating. And when we were in Taiwan, both of us were working full-time, usually more than full-time. We'd hit the restaurants for dinner, right? And so we were just eating foods from all over the country, very reasonable prices. I wrote about this in my memoir, At the Chinese Table, just kind of the immersion into the food. And when we came back to the States, there was nothing available that was even close to what we were eating in Taiwan. Even the basic ingredients like salted Shanghainese mustard grains or good fermented tofu or even great soy sauce was not around. I mean, because Chinese soy sauce and Japanese soy sauce are two different things. Just like if you want to cook, Italian food and you try to use a Riesling, it's going to taste off because it's the wrong ingredient, right? So I had to learn from the ground up how to make certain things, the basic ingredients. And I go into that in the back of All Under Heaven. It's like filling up your pantry with all these different sauces or salted ingredients or pickles or whatever, making it the way the Chinese have enjoyed them for thousands of years. And as I started writing about it, I realized that as we went back to Taiwan for business stuff, that the great restaurants were closing. The great chefs were retiring or passing on. And so we couldn't eat those foods anymore. It was like this, we were in Taiwan during this small, precious window of culinary majesty. And so we come back here and there's nothing that comes even close to it. We have Chinese American food, which is good. I mean, I adore Chinese American food. There's Cantonese food, which is fantastic, right? But it's not on the same level. And so that's why I wanted to write On Into Heaven, was to put down these recipes before they disappeared. And it's what's so strange is it's right now it's being translated into Chinese. It's going to be published in Shandong in China probably later on this year or the beginning of next year, because they too have experienced this like a huge culinary gap in their heritage, and food is so important to us. I mean, I grew up on, like tuna hot dish, and macaroni and cheese and Jell-O salad. And, okay. It's like, it's not the same, probably the same thing that my Scottish ancestors were making, who are not totally renowned for great food, but, we do have our haggis and our shortbread. And, and so there's this like a cutoff between what we are now and what we used to have, as far as great foods are talked about. And so nowadays you have people coming out with cookbooks that talk about things that are from, Lagos in Nigeria, or say Korean vegetarian food. And it's stuff that we have never heard of. You can't get them in restaurants, but you can find them in cookbooks, which is what's so wonderful about cookbooks.
And you examined 35 different cuisines in China. That's a lot. Like if you had asked me how many cuisines there were in China, I wouldn't have even come close to guessing that. So I guess, like if you looked at the United States, in 50 states, we probably have a very different cuisine in each of the 50 states. So can you talk a little bit about the regions of China as it relates to the cuisines and how that's broken down and how you identified a culinary region?
Sure. China traditionally has categorized its culinary schools into 4 or 8 or 10 usually, but it's really haphazard. I tried to find the reasoning for this. I wrote an article for Vice Munchies about this. why do we have this? And I could not find any rhyme or reason. People just accepted it. Like the food of Anhui province, which, is excellent, but nobody ever eats Anhui food anymore. And this was because this was from 100 years ago. And this is just the way someone categorized it. And everybody said, oh yeah, we need something to put our cuisines into perspective. Let's just say there's 4 or 8 or 12 or 10 or whatever. And we're done. But I said, that doesn't make any sense. You're saying like, we're talking about the food of Jiangsu province or Guangdong province, but you're ignoring places like Hebei or say Jiangsu or the far west and all the minority foods, Taiwan, Hakka. You have to put these on the plate too, because these are all very worthy cuisines. And once you realize that China is as big as Europe and is actually more diverse in terms of climate, in terms of territory, in terms of history. I mean, my goodness, you've got 5,000 years of history. Once you do that and you start breaking it down, you can see that there are distinct regions. And I figured out they were probably around 5. Some people say 6, but I think 5 is a good way to start off. And then within those, they have their own little families. They use similar ingredients. For example, say you go into Europe, you look at Europe, you'll have like Northern Italy and Southern Italy are very different cuisines, right? So you would probably divide those into 2 different regions, with Northern Italy probably stretching into Southern France and maybe over into, Switzerland or whatever. It's the same kind of a principle. And so once I did that, I was able to then go in a little bit deeper. And then, but the real kind of like ta-da moment, the light bulb went off, was when I realized that people ate the same thing that they speak. For example, if you speak Japanese at home with your mom's probably making Japanese food, right? If you speak Mexican Spanish at home, your mom's probably making tortillas for dinner, right? And it's the same kind of principle in China, because in like Hainan, which is the most southernmost island in China, they were speaking a type of a Hakka. And I looked at the food, and they were eating food that was Hakkanese, which was like, wow, that was mind-blowing for me. It just like opened up the doors, and I realized, oh, this is it. You eat what you speak. And it's the same the world over. And so that's how human beings are wired.
I feel that people talk a lot in generalities, especially when it comes to food. People will say, I like Chinese food, or I don't like Chinese food, but that's such a weird blanket statement. There's so much diversity. What is it you like? What is it you don't like about that? So it's really great to kind of shed the light on the cuisine, similarities, differences. Do you find that there's any within the country, I don't know, maybe disagreement about like the origins of a dish? Because we get into that even here in the US, like, what state lays claim to whatever dish? Do they kind of get into that a little bit? Like, no, this is definitely a Taiwanese dish as opposed to this?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You can get into huge thrashes online on that. Everybody wants to lay claim to it. But, the problem with food is that it's not usually memorialized. People tend to cook and not write things down. I have some of my grandma's recipe cards, but there's no real cookbooks from her time that she used. It was all just kind of like, by the seat of your pants, and you picked up a recipe card from Aunt Sarah for, chocolate chip cookies, but it wasn't memorialized. And so that's the same problem with the Chinese. I go back and I've found some very old cookbooks that are absolutely fantastic, but those are rare. It's just like in the West, we very rarely put things down in an orally manner, of like how much a recipe should use of a certain ingredient. It was like my grandma taught me to cook, a handful of this and a piece of butter the size of an egg, and you whip it together till it looks right. Well, thanks, Grandma. That didn't help very much, right? So putting it down scientifically is the way that we can repeat how people did it. And so, get back to your question. Yeah, there's a lot of argument, but usually you can kind of like pull at threads and figure out what's going on. For example, Taiwan is very known for its, well known for its beef noodle soup, right? And when I went to Taiwan in the 70s, that's how old I am, the Taiwanese that I knew as friends would never eat beef because water buffalo were like the family pet. I mean, they tilled the land, the rice paddies, and they were beloved, and you never would kill them for meat. It would like be killing, Rover and Fido for dinner, right? The same kind of concept. So to say that this was a Taiwanese dish was very strange to me. And then we went to the different beef noodle soup stands, and they tend to be run by Sichuanese soldiers. And they had brought their recipes from their hometowns in Sichuan to Taiwan, and it became gradually beloved by later generations, first by the people who were descended from mainlanders, and then later by the Taiwanese themselves. But it's not something that just came up, coming out of the head of a god. This is something new, and it has nothing to do with our other recipes. Yeah, but it's ours. No, everything has to have shared roots, and so you start picking apart things. If I've been called a food scholar, which is nice, but what you do is you go back into the ingredients. You say, where does this come? Where does that come? If they're using chili oil, well, that's definitely not Taiwanese. So where did that come from? And then you can say, it's from Sichuan province.
And I imagine you wouldn't be able to do any of this had you not been so fluent in being able to read and speak Chinese, correct? Like you couldn't go over someone like me and just figure this out.
Well, you'd have to go onto Wikipedia a lot and then kind of like trust that they're doing it right, you have to go back and find the original materials and start going down Chinese language rabbit holes, It's like this whole thrash, for example, on chili crisp, it's like people are getting very upset and twisted into knots about it. And it's like, I keep telling you, it's a condiment. It's a condiment. And the people make it in all over, especially southern China in the hot areas. But it's also made in Central America. And I'm sure in the Middle East too, they have hot oil. So it's like, it's a condiment. Just relax. You can make it yourself. And it's delicious. And let's just go have a bowl of noodles and just calm down a little bit,
I feel like the conversation is finally starting to mellow out. I'm hoping by the time this podcast airs, the chili crisp conversation has died down a little bit. Kind of going back to the American thing. So, again, growing up, especially, all I had was like this very Americanized Chinese, the takeout culture, right? Like we very rarely even ate in a Chinese restaurant, very much just takeout. So was that because availability of ingredients at the time here in the US, like I'm sure it was much harder to get authentic ingredients that people maybe wanted to cook with, let's say in 1980 as opposed to today. But why did we kind of get this Americanized version of Chinese food here?
Well, Chinese Americans, are descended from Chinese immigrants, mainly from the coastal areas of Guangdong province, that came over here to work on the railroads or to pan gold or whatever reason they came here. And they had to survive, and so they had to offer foods that Americans would eat. And so if you look, for example, at a program, say like Boardwalk Empire, they're going to a fancy chop suey restaurant in Atlantic City, and it was considered extremely exotic, and everything was very Chinesey. It had nothing to do with what was eaten by Chinese people themselves. It was more to cater to Western tastes. And Ken Hom wrote a wonderful foreword to my book where he talked about working in his uncle's restaurant, in a Chinese American restaurant in Chicago, and they had two refrigerators. One had sweet and sour pork and had egg foo young and chop suey, and the other was for the Chinese people, which is the more good ingredient. You have pork belly, you have whole chickens, you've got feet and dry scallops and things like that. So it was a different aesthetic, and everything was just so strange, I'm sure, to non-Chinese Americans, that it was just easier to get into things that were acceptable to us, like sweet and sour pork. We Americans, we like sweet, we like crunch. And you put almonds on it, even better, right? It was things that were kind of like fashioned for American taste. And this happens all over the world. You go to Taiwan or to China and you eat American food, it's inevitably fried chicken like a KFC or hamburgers, but they're also given a little bit of a twist so it fits local tastes. And that's always the way you slide under the door and you begin to make a culinary tradition acceptable to the people who live there. And it's all in increments. When I was a kid, I remember, Julia Child came on the airwaves and she was so wonderful introducing French food to us, but we couldn't eat French food. You couldn't get good olive oil or French-style flour or great cheeses or even good wines. I mean, goodness, we had Gallo in jugs, but we did have a crepe place down the corner finally opened up, and that was our introduction to French food. But it was filled with chicken a la king, and so, but look at what happened in the intervening years. We now have stellar French restaurants across the United States. Chinese is still vastly underappreciated and underrepresented. The Michelin stars, you don't see many for Chinese restaurants. Korean and Japanese tend to get Michelin stars, but not Chinese. And so this is all a matter of educating them to understand what it is they're eating, to appreciate the foods and the textures, because Chinese food is really about texture. It's almost a decadent type of cooking when you get into the real classic cuisines of Zhejiang and Jiangsu province, where you have things like, for example, jellyfish, or you have swallow's nest, or whatever. There's all these different things that are not about flavor, but about the way they feel in the mouth. They call them mouthfeel. And then braising them with excellent ham or excellent chicken stock. It's this very, very elevated cuisine. And I'm hoping that in my lifetime, I'm going to be seeing Americans going to restaurants and eating them with the same type of finesse that they go to an excellent sushi restaurant now, where they allow a sushi master to make them something that is extraordinary, even in Tokyo. And we can do the same thing here in the U.S. That'd be fantastic.
I'm hoping so. And that's one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the podcast, is to, kind of put this out there to more people. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, so I feel very fortunate between our Chinatown and having like Peter Chang in this area and some really stellar restaurants. I've had the opportunity to have some really great stuff. I've never tried jellyfish before. So is that something you would recommend trying if I've never had it?
Oh, yeah. Americans like crunch, but it's a different kind of a crunch that kind of resounds in the eardrums. And it all has to do with the sauce. It'll probably have something like julienne celery and maybe a vinaigrette of some sort, which is like with a Chinese vinegar and some good sesame oil, maybe a little bit of toasted sesame seeds. And it's very refreshing. And the Chinese are so detail-oriented that they even differentiate between the cap and the tentacles of the jellyfish, because they have different textures, and the way they behave when you cook with them is different too. So they are just so granular when it comes to ingredients. They've had just thousands of years on us, It's hard to even think of, or even to comprehend or wrap your mind around how ancient this food culture is. It's probably one of the oldest in human culture, to the Chinese food culture. And they're only beginning to really comprehend and appreciate it themselves, because, poor China's been put through the mill for the past couple hundred years. And they're only now beginning to have the wherewithal to sit down and have a great meal without somebody bombing them or invading them or something,
Yeah, we're such babies here. We're so young. One of the things that struck me is I just got back from going to the UK last month with my family, and you see buildings there that are 1,000 years old. Like here, if you see a church that's 100 years old, you're like, that's an old church. But you go over there, it's like, wow, this thing's been here for 1,000 years. In China, they have a lot of years on us, so they've had some practice with their cuisine. You also wrote the dim sum field guide. I love good dim sum. My favorite things to go with a lot of people, so I can try a lot of things, but sometimes it's just my wife and myself. So if, let's say, 2 people were going to go do dim sum, do you have some favorite dishes that you would recommend that were, if we're not limited stomach space, we're not going to be able to have a lot, what are your go-to things for a dim sum dinner?
Well, the Chinese believe that there are 4 dishes that really can tell you how good a restaurant is, a dim sum restaurant is, and that would be egg tarts, the barbecued pork buns, the char siu bao, siu mai, which are the little cups filled with like a dumpling that are filled with pork and perhaps chopped water chestnuts, things like that, and hargao, which are they're a very like a crystalline wrappers, and they usually have a whole shrimp inside, and they will really tell you, like the hargao itself will tell you how fresh the shrimp are. Are they using fresh shrimp or stuff that they got on discount, at a frozen, from a freezer somewhere. The danta are the egg tarts, which should be smooth and shiny and kind of like barely held together, and so you put them in their mouth and they just kind of like disappear. Char siu bao are have like the raised dough that is actually very hard to duplicate because it's a combination of 3 different rising agents in it. So you have a levain, you have a baking powder, plus you have baking ammonia. So it kind of explodes and it opens up into a flour. And inside you should have like a wonderful barbecued meat, the char siu, which is mixed with oyster sauce and hoisin and all these different kinds of sauces. That it's not only sauce, it's mainly the meat, but it's held together in this kind of like an unctuous package. It's just an experience because the dough melts away in your mouth, and then you get to work on the meat, and it's just fantastic. And then the siu mai, which are little cups of egg dough that are filled with minced pork and other ingredients, and then steamed, and that should then taste of nothing but pure, juicy, high quality pork and whatever condiments they put in there. So you can see like they're judging you on your ingredients, on your different kinds of cooking methods, on different cultural references, and it's kind of like just like a cheat sheet on how good a place is. And by the way, when you go to a dim sum restaurant, if you can go with 3 people or combinations of 3, you're going to come out ahead because they usually will have the dishes served with 3 portions. Sometimes 2, but usually 3. So you'll end up ordering 2 of something when if you had 3 people, you'd each have 1 bite, and that would be just enough.
Oh, we've found that many times with my wife and I going that it's like on this dish, I get 2 and you get 1. And on the other one, you get 2 and I get 1 if there's just 2 of us. Interestingly, my favorite thing, or one of my favorite things, has been the turnip cake, which isn't even turnip, it's radish. Is that correct?
That's right. It's the Chinese radish.
Why would you even call it turnip cake if it's a radish? It
was just bad translations. I mean, translations are responsible for a lot of problems in the world. One of them is radish cake. If you call them a turnip, nobody wants to eat it. But the Chinese radish, it's because it's something that we don't have in the West, or at least until recently. And it's the same family as a radish. It's not as hot. It's actually just quite juicy and luscious. And it's shredded. And they're fantastic. I agree, yeah. You can't get better than a great radish cake. And it's steamed into a pudding and then sliced. And then you, in the best possible worlds, it's either pan-fried or deep-fried. And so you have, again, the contrast of textures. The exterior is crunchy and crisp. The inside is kind of like molten and luscious. And then you've got these little bits of like char siu pork or dried shrimp or whatever that's in there, and then kind of like explode on your tongue.
And if I want to try making that at home, would I look for Chinese radish? I mean, it's not daikon, is it? Different things?
Can be used. It's the same family.
Oh, okay. We have an H Mart here, so every once in a while when I feel especially like I want to try something new and exciting, I'll go with my long list of things to pick up at H Mart and attempt a new dish.
They're great, yeah. And if you can, get the Korean radish, especially during cool months, because it's shaped like a football and it's super sweet. I like to eat them just like apples. You just peel off the skin, make sure that there's no fibers underneath, and then slice it up and eat it. They're sweet and just crunchy and just a real treat.
I wish I had someone like you to go shopping with me when I go there.
We'd love to go.
And then getting into the aisles, how do you even pick ingredient? Like, I want a soy sauce that's not a Kikkoman, or I want a brand of rice wine. And you go to a place like H Mart and there's, 30 types of soy sauce, and none of them are in English. So I don't even know if it's Chinese or Japanese or whatever. Like, do you have any guidance on where to start besides just like pulling out your phone and trying to do a Google image search, or maybe go in ahead of time with like a picture of a bottle that you found on the internet?
Well, if you have, I wrote a guide to Chinese soy sauces for Eater. If you go do a search with my name and then Eater and then soy sauce, it'll come up. And it'll tell you about the different kinds of soy sauces that are used and how they're used and which brands are best. Also in the back of Under Heaven, I have a glossary that talks about the different ingredients. Like you said, how do you pick a rice wine, like a Shaoxing rice wine or a cooking wine? And it also will tell you which brands are good. It has them in Chinese if you want to like take a photo of it and then show it to a clerk and say, could you give me this? Then they can point it out to you. But the soy sauces are a whole field. I mean, you have ones that you use for cooking. Taiwan has absolutely the best soy sauce. I mean, bar none. They obviously have artisanal brands now that are coming out. They're small batch, really high end, that can be used for finishing, and they're so good they don't have preservatives in them, so you have to keep them in the refrigerator. But it's the kind of thing like if you develop a taste for excellent Chinese soy sauce, you're going to start buying these bottles that nobody's ever heard of, and it's going to elevate your food so much. It's kind of like putting on really good cultured butter or finishing a dish with great Parmesan cheese, rather than shaking it out of a can. The difference is night and day, and it's the same thing with Chinese ingredients.
Well, I need to seek out some of those and up my soy sauce game for sure. And, scrolling your Instagram these days, I see you have a lot of sweet treats. And I know that you're working on a new book, The Art of Chinese Baking. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, sure. This is my new project. I started it during COVID shutdown. One thing I got to warn everybody, if you're writing a book, don't try to publish it during COVID, okay? Because it's like a tree falling in the forest. Nobody's there to hear it. So my memoir is out there, so please go buy it. But I didn't know what to write next, and we were shut up at home, so I figured, I'll do something like a little tiny book on Taiwan's cakes. Like they have these wonderful chiffon cakes and that are just roll cakes that are just absolutely luscious, and we have nothing like them in the West. And as I started writing it, it's kind of snowballed, and my editor at Norton, who's really lovely, Melanie Tortorelli, she said, what about this? What about that? Could you talk about this? And then all of a sudden I ended up with, a 500-page manuscript and 200,000 words. And bless her heart, she hasn't told me to cut it down yet. But nobody has ever really explored the world of Chinese sweets and breads. They think, you look at almost every traditional Chinese cookbook and they'll say there's no such thing as Chinese dessert. Well, yeah, in a way. You go to a banquet, you probably won't end the banquet with a piece of cake or pie or even a cookie, You will have like a bowl of sweet soup because they think that you're probably full by then and you don't want something more to fill up your stomach, right? But in the West, we're used to have, you go to French Laundry or Per Se or whatever, they'll give you like a flight of desserts. And you suddenly feel like, I know what a goose in Toulouse feels like. I don't need something more stuffed down my throat. The Chinese are very sensible. However, the Chinese absolutely adore sweets and they eat them at a separate meal. It's for afternoon tea or it's for breakfast or late at night. It's something separate. When your stomach is half or almost empty, then you can attack a piece of cake. But even then, they're extremely light and they're almost marshmallowy in texture. So the chiffon, lowered sugar so the flavors pop. You don't have really heavy ganache or dark chocolate, but you might have like a real faint milk chocolate, but it will be like bouncing off other flavors like fresh strawberries or mango or kiwi fruit or something. Or you'll have a combination of like red beans inside of the chiffon cake, contrasting with matcha in the chantilly cream, or vice versa, And so they're very subtle, and they're all about texture, and they're so light that I serve them to my really skinny Chinese girlfriends that don't touch anything fattening, and they'll polish off a plate because they're so light. They're just like, oh, and then they'll start scraping the plate and, where's the rest of that chantilly cream because it's so good. And so it speaks of home that I think that it really will revolutionize the way that we look at cake. They don't like buttercream in China. They like chantilly cream because it's light and it's just whipped cream and sugar. And then it's usually contrasted with something that's slightly tart, like say a passion fruit gelée or mango or something like that, which then lends it this whole other layer of lusciousness. So you can see why it's almost pornographic. I mean, you go into it, and then as I started going into the cakes and then the roll cakes and the traditional cakes, the steamed cakes of China, which are absolutely fantastic. They sometimes bloom like flowers, or they're made with like almost a sourdough starter, which it lends them this incredible depth. You might have a little bit of soy sauce in there, so that you have savoriness that's contrasting with the sweetness. Or the cookies that have a savory element, like fried onions, or even the fermented tofu, which is kind of like a feta cheese. It's just like the more I scratched, it's kind of like the more I found. Like almost an archaeological dig. You start digging up this incredible city of Pompeii underneath all this nonsense that's on top, and it's not about fortune cookies. It's something that's absolutely insanely good. The flatbreads that came from Central Asia and then morphed into Chinese recipes. It just like you can tell, I'm absolutely enthralled by this subject, and the more I got into it, the more I loved it. And my neighbors actually adore me because I keep feeding them, and they're wearing muumuus all the time. But my friends love me now too, and it's like, have a cookie, have a pie.
I would love to be your neighbor. That sounds amazing. Was this a relatively new thing for you, as getting into the desserts as opposed to like all the savory cooking?
Oh, absolutely. You look at All Under Heaven, and I go in each section. I have it goes from appetizers to desserts, and the desserts are not really developed because I was really kind of like, following what everybody had said, which is there really is not that much to talk about when it comes to Chinese sweets. But the more I delved into it, the back here I have all these cookbooks that I had collected over the years with people that would say, yeah, there's this cookie that I really like, and let me tell you about it. And starting to figure out what each area had for sweets, because the Chinese have a collective sweet tooth that is absolutely phenomenal. Great candies. Oh my God. When I went to Taiwan, I'm sideline here, I was absolutely floored by two candies. One was like the center of a Butterfinger without the chocolate. It was like a spun candy of finely ground peanuts and honey and magic, and you would take a bite and it would just disappear on your tongue, and it would just be this intensely peanutty flavor just flowing around your head, and then this little bit of sugar just kind of like wisping down your throat, and you go, holy cow, I can't live anywhere near this place. I'll be the size of a house within a week. The other one was this candy that was a chewy candy made of black dates and toasted walnuts. It was like a toffee kind of a texture. It was really chewy, and I've replicated that in a brownie style cookie for this cookbook because I really wanted to emulate the flavors of those candies, but in a brownie form, and they are just so good.
And that almost sounds like Middle Eastern to me. Like when you talk about like dates and stuff, I think like Middle Eastern desserts. So that's interesting to kind of see it as Chinese.
Chinese dates are not the same. We call them dates, but they're called jujubes. Is the correct?
Oh, right.
But
yeah,
we
yeah,
think of jujubes as theater candies, like licorice candies, right? But they're almost like apples when they're fresh. They're about the size of an olive, and they have an olive-shaped pit inside of them. But when they dry, they take on this really aromatic, perfumey qualities, and they come either in black or red. And black ones are sometimes slightly smoked, which gives them a wonderful, different edge to them rather than just being floral.
So if everything goes your way, when do you foresee this book coming out?
Probably in fall 2025. I just gave it to my editor, and she's despairing over the size of it. So when she gets it back to me, then I have to edit it down. But we've started into the design phase of it, which is fun because I'll be illustrating it like I do all of my books.
That is a whole other skill set and something interesting. Talk a little bit about the illustration, because it's not something you see every day with a cookbook. These days it seems to be very large scale, probably expensive photo shoots with maybe well-known cookbook photographers. But the option to illustrate is, I think, pretty uncommon in this realm.
Yeah, but it's like you look at Julia Child's original books, The Art of Japanese Cooking, all these traditional classic books, they usually don't have any photographs in them. My first book, All Under Heaven, was published originally through McSweeney's, which is like an independent bookstore, publisher, I mean. And they asked me, they said, looking at my massive manuscript, they said, listen, you got a choice here. Do you want photographs or do you want more recipes? Because we can't do both. Because if you have photos in a cookbook, what people don't realize, it makes the book so much more expensive because you have to use different paper. You can't have the colors seep through. It makes the book heavier too. They said one or the other, and I said, listen, why don't we have as many recipes as you will allow me, and I'll do the illustrations. And I'd always loved to draw, and so I did all the technical stuff like how to wrap a wonton or a spring roll, how to dice things or use a knife, things like that. And then added, occasional drawings into it as well. And that kind of made it a little bit more like classic in flavor. And I know, people like to have photographs nowadays, but they don't realize that, number one, it really increases the price of the book phenomenally. And especially when your first book, no, you're probably not going to get a, full color, fully illustrated Nigella Lawson level Martha Stewart kind of a cookbook. You're going to have to, be reasonable and work with a publisher to get the best that you possibly can and just hope for the best.
What do you think about, I don't really want, maybe I'll say the glut of cookbooks these days. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the article that popped up on social media the past day or so, basically saying does every influencer need a cookbook these days? Because it seems like all these people, I cook from home. I have now 100,000 or maybe 1 million followers on TikTok. Got to strike while the iron's hot, get a cookbook out there. And then we just get these very, quite often mediocre cookbooks where people aren't really doing anything new. It's, my mom's chicken parm recipe or whatever, as opposed to people who are spending years really researching and, putting out a quality cookbook that I think is going to last. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm the same camp as you. I think that there's a massive glut of book, and I'm really wondering if 1 million followers on TikTok translates into 1 million cookbook sales. I really doubt it. What you do is you go look at the remainder stacks at any bookstore, and there's a lot of cookbooks that really aren't helpful. If you really want to know about how to make a whole array of standard classics, get a Joy of Cooking. It's a wonderful book that I use to this day. But if you want to really support inventive cooking, go look for the people who really love what they're doing and have spent years on writing about it and studying it and cooking it, and are going to tell you something new. You don't need another recipe for a carrot salad or blueberry muffins or chicken parm. There already are great recipes out. There's 1 million great recipes for each of those dishes, all right? But if you want to look into how they enjoy food in, say, in Sri Lanka or Bangkok, there are some great cookbooks out there that will open up your world and probably blow your mind. You'll have to get a whole another pantry for what you're going to be buying, but it will change the way you eat, and also it will open up your mind to the world. I think we don't realize that it's not just white people food, in the world. we're just a small minority. The way that people cook really shows how their people have lived and survived throughout the years, and then how, as time went on and life got better, how they learned to enjoy their life through food, because we all celebrate with food. For example, you go to look for great Armenian food. The people of Armenia went through hell and back again, but they managed to create these great dishes that to this day make me almost salivate thinking about them. You know, a great baklava, or you get a great pilaf, or a way with lamb, and it'll tell you how these people who they interacted with over the centuries. You look at the herbs and the spices, and it's just the same thing that I tried to do with All Under Heaven, and with my new cookbook, The Art of Chinese Baking, The Art of Chinese Baking, is to show these cultural threads that bring you in and show you world history almost in a microcosm, where you can look at a flatbread that has cumin on it. You're not going to find cumin in the highly populated areas of China, but in the West, because it came from Central Asia. And it evokes, like, to me, these visions of traveling on the Silk Road on a camel, and you can almost smell, the incense and the cumin and the garlic in the air, and just learning how we are as a human race through food is just so wonderful and mind expanding. I think if we understand each other through food, because language is hard and it takes a lifetime to really master language, but you probably can master the appreciation of a food through a few cookbooks. Getting great cookbooks on Russia, for example, might open up your mind and say, well, maybe the Russians aren't completely bad. There must be good Russian grandmas over there making pierogi, and it's seeing them not as faceless, but rather as human. And the same thing they do with the people in the Middle East or Central America. It's seeing people as individuals and as not as monoliths. So for example, we go to a tamale place here down in San Jose. It's run by people from San Salvador, and you get to talking with them, my broken Spanish to them, and you start to see and communicate with them and realize these really are just humans just like me, and they make this extraordinary food, and why isn't everybody eating a tamale from San Salvador? It's so different from a Mexican tamale, and it's so good, and why is it so good? And you start talking to them, and then you realize how much we don't know, and we get so involved with what the Kardashians are doing or what Trump is up to, when it's all extraneous. The world is so marvelous as it is, and food is just it's like a slip slide into human culture, and like, get in there and enjoy.
I would love to think that more people would be able to relate to humans all over the world through food, although I don't always think that's the case. I mean, clearly we have people today who love eating Mexican food and are ready to deport everyone back to Mexico, even people who are actual legal citizens here. It's sad. Growing up, I've said before, we had a Vietnamese restaurant in town and my dad wouldn't let us eat there. Like we were still so close to like the Vietnamese conflict that it was like, right. And that was not an unusual sentiment. I grew up in New England. I think my hometown was probably kind of like a racist town, like, to be honest. But to see this like hardworking family trying to, bring something and showcase it, and that I was literally not allowed to eat there as a kid. But thankfully they were in business for a large number of years, and in my 20s, I was able to visit them. But, that's the kind of thing I grew up with. And I'd like to think that we're a little more evolved than that these days. But, unfortunately, some days if you watch the news, which I try not to do too much of, you think it's actually still kind of going on here.
Well, humans are humans, and we are provincial. I think that's hard to escape. It's what we are as humans is very provincial. we like closed groups, that's why we belong to clubs. You're not allowed here. You're not allowed in this neighborhood. We put up fences. But I guess my hope is that humans can evolve, and we've gotten to such a density of population where we have people from all over the world for the first time as our neighbors. I mean, I grew up in a very, very white area where the most that you would get as far as non-WASP was maybe a couple Portuguese families. And, but nowadays, my goodness, the Bay Area is like you've got people from everywhere in the world and foods from all over the world. And I guess my point is that we're going to have to reach out and get to know our neighbors. And the best way to do that is through food and sharing with them. It's not only just eating what the folks from Ukraine brought over, but also sharing your food with them and getting to know them on a personal level, and maybe going out for a pizza together. Let's throw in another culture just to make things interesting. And I think it just breaks down barriers. Is that food is just a great way, and it's not like everybody's going to do it. I mean, I know my own family is. Extended family is, some of them are not going to be open to eating even tofu. They think it's weird, but it's a way to kind of like open up a door and sitting them down, and then offering a plate of tofu along with everything else. And if they don't want to eat it, fine. But everybody's going, oh God, this is so good. And after a while, they'll probably just sneak a little bite and go, this isn't half bad, It's kind of like a mild cheese. It's like a farmer cheese. I can relate to it now. And so, yeah, it's just like, to me, I think there's so much joy in the world. It's just like, food is just a great way of expressing human joy and delight in the world, and the bounty that we are given everywhere. Once you appreciate great fish, then you realize, well, we do have to save the oceans. We can't overfish. You're looking at photos of, like the Tokyo fish market when they've got a million bluefin tuna lying there, and you're going, how much of a percentage of the fish population are we talking about here? And where do the rest of these fish go? After the sushi, like, what do they do with the rest of that? I mean, they can't possibly just turn it into cat food, right? But when we learn to appreciate food and realize we don't have to have massive amounts of food to eat every day, but really good quality, then we're elevating the state of ingredients. We're still elevating what we require in our restaurants. We're going to say, I want to go to a Chinese restaurant that serves great Chaozhou food or Taiwanese food or Hakka food. And I don't want you to dumb it down. I want to eat what you're eating for dinner. Could you please do that? Once you get to know the owners, saying, tell me, what's your favorite food? What do you eat for dinner? And could you make that for me next time? And that's how we started to deal with Chinese restaurants is, we'd meet the owner, we'd say, I would really like this. Can you make it next time? And they'd think about it. And yeah, I probably could do that. Yeah. And then they'd start making foods that we wanted and that we appreciated. And then they would start offering it on menus. Because we're like hyping up and telling people, go there, they have chow yen or whatever. And just getting people excited about food, and then saying it's okay to cook what you love. You don't have to dumb it down for people. Not everybody is going to want to eat sweet and sour pork.
I think we're in such a great time for food right now for that reason. I don't want really get into like authenticity and traditional because that's a whole other thing. But I do think a lot of people now here in the US are wanting a more authentic or traditional experience when they go out to eat. So we are looking to not just have that same old Americanized Chinese food that we had, maybe growing up, but to let the restaurateurs create or serve the foods that they love. And that's one of the things I like about like finding a local place and going in and becoming a repeat customer is, you get that little familiarity and comfort with them and hopefully get to try some new things.
It's like, did you ever see the movie Harold and Maude? Maude says to Harold, try something new every day. And I think that really has to be like, kind of like tattooed on your chest when you approach food. Is you don't need to have mac and cheese and hot dogs every day. You need to have something new every day. At least one thing that's new. Try for that. And if it's really hard, then once a week. But at least open up these horizons and just try all this great food out there. My God, it's just incredible. We're so lucky nowadays.
Well, that's what I love. My kids are, I have 11-year-old twins, and while they can be particular, they love, especially they love all kinds of Asian cuisines. So going to H Mart, and especially the produce, just the other day we saw dragon fruit, but it was a yellow one and we had never had it. And my daughter said, can we get that? Yeah, sure. Why not? Like, I was so excited that she didn't go for the crazy exotic, like Kit Kats from Japan that are crazy flavors. I mean, if I took her down that aisle, she probably would have too. But the fact that she was just as excited to, try a new fruit. So I love taking them shopping, and it's just kind of, especially in the like produce and meat or fermented aisle, like if there's something they want, I'm a big fan of, getting it and going home and trying it.
Oh, that's thrilling. That's the kind of thing, like, it's like Alice Waters, she was writing about her daughter, Fanny, and teaching her at a very young age to appreciate, stinky cheeses and snails and all this great stuff. And it's like, wow, that is what you should be doing. It's not just, feeding them carrot sticks, and string cheese, but actually educating their palate to being open to culture, to different people. And I think that's fantastic what you're doing.
We could probably talk for hours since you had a 500-page book and then other multiple books. But is there anything you want to leave our listeners with before we get out of here today? Any final words or anything?
Like I said before, it's like, open your mind, get good cookbooks, get some good classic cookbooks, read like Diana Kennedy's books on the cuisines of Mexico, or Elizabeth Ando talking about Japanese food, or whatever, Elizabeth David. There's some great, great writers out there, and they're so passionate about what they do. They don't all have to be TV stars, and it's not a knock on, like Nigella Lawson, she's a wonderful writer, and she's very passionate, and she's a lovely cookbook writer, and her recipes work. But they don't all have to be on TV. Some of them are just people that sit in front of a typewriter or a computer and just pound out words and tell you about the foods of the world. And open up your mind, and then put away the cake mixes and make a real cake from scratch, and start to enjoy life through food. It all doesn't have to be frozen and microwaved. It's more than just fuel. It's passion. It's involvement in the world. It's excitement. It's being curious. It's having a fascination with the way other people have managed to survive and thrive. Just like food is just like, it's an odd avenue to go down, but if this is your passion as it is with mine, really dive in head first, mouth first, and just gobble up whatever comes your way. It's just going to be so fun.
I'm a big fan of food and cooking. I assume that most of the people listening to this podcast are big fans of food and cooking. Hopefully some of them will get your books and tackle Chinese cooking at home. I would love that. So if anyone's listening to this, let us know how it goes. Reach out to us on social media. Share those pictures on Instagram and tag us, because I would love to see more people doing Chinese cooking at home.
Oh, yeah. And I'm on Instagram and all the social media as well. So it's usually Madame Huang or the real Madame Huang.
Always linked in the show notes. So you'll be able to find her on social media. I also link to books and articles that I think are interesting. So
thank you.
Make sure you all check that out in the show notes. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, this was a joy. I really enjoyed this.
And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with Chefs Without Restaurants. Thanks so much and have a great week. You're still here? The podcast's over. If you are indeed still here, thanks for taking the time to listen to the show. I'd love to direct you to one place, and that's chefswithoutrestaurants.org. From there, you'll be able to join our email newsletter, get connected in our free Facebook group, and join our personal chef, catering, and food truck database so I can help get you more job leads. And you'll also find a link to our sponsor page, where you'll find products and services I love. You pay nothing additional to use these links, but I may get a small commission, which helps keep the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast and organization running. You might even get a discount for using some of these links. As always, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants, or send me an email at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.